I so excited for today's conversation. I'm here in the Feminine Frequency online podcast studio with a dear soul client of mine, Jessica. And I'm just so grateful that you're here and that we get to hear your story today and really inspire our listeners by your journey. So, welcome to the show, Jess.
Thank you, Amy. I'm so grateful to be here.
Yeah, yeah. We've been on quite a journey. We've been working together, I believe, for about a year now. It's been around that time. And even before we started working together, you were a podcast listener and you had also been on a spiritual journey where you had a pretty big awakening. You were making some big changes. And then in our one on one work together in the embodied leader mentorship, we have taken that to a whole next level. And we'll share more throughout our time together today. But who you are today and where you are and what you've created is like a quantum leap into a new reality, and it's really inspiring to have like kind of the behind the scenes experience of watching you step into this new identity and this new version of yourself. So let's start by sharing a little bit about your journey before we met, because your journey around sobriety and finding your spiritual path is something that I feel a lot of people don't talk about, or I feel like we need more of that. So share with us kind of where you were and the journey that you were on before we started working together.
Sure, that's a great question. And I would say, just from a sobriety standpoint, my relationship with alcohol was complicated at best. It was never healthy. And it started from a very, very low place when I went to college. And so I did slow down over the years, but I found that even when now looking back after almost 2 years of sobriety, I found that it had a huge impact on my mental health, even when I only had a drink or two a week or didn't think I was drinking that much. It also impacted just my productivity levels. And I had this low level anxiety, or maybe even high level anxiety, that just never went away until I fully stopped drinking for some time. And so I have always incorporated other tools in my journey before I got sober. And so I did do a lot of therapy throughout my 20s and 30s. I'm 37 now. I did journaling. I did things like yoga, or I love the outdoors, but sobriety was sort of the biggest thing holding me back that I didn't even realize was holding me back. And when I connect it to a sobriety standpoint too, it's something that disconnected me from my intuition and really just didn't allow me to be my true authentic self. Before we met, I had been sober for almost a year. So there were a lot of things that I had done to be able to just get to that place, because I was a huge people pleaser for a lot of my adult life. I didn't know how to say no to people. I didn't know how to be in situations and be confident not drinking. So I wouldn't even go in those situations for a while. I just kind of isolated, which felt terrible too. And so I would say that I found you at the exact right time when I really just needed to take that next step, where I needed help, where, all of the tools that I had done were working, but they just weren't really accelerating me. Or I just felt like this would be that next step to moving up. And even when I found your podcast, I just happened to find it. And I really liked that you talked about sisterhood and things that were really relevant to me. And when I reached out to you, or we connected around me becoming your client, I was driving and I heard episode 333, and I just thought, wow, this just really hits on a different level. And then you were talking about and it was an older episode at that time. And I heard something about, I think it was like small group coaching you were doing, but it was like way past. And then you sent an email later that day about private client coaching. And I was like, this is a sign. Like, I know this is meant to be. And so there's just so much work that you have to do on your own or you can do on your own. But the journey with you just has elevated me so far. And I guess just last thing, circling back to the spiritual component, I feel like the sobriety journey's just been so connected to that because things like meditation are super important to me. Tomorrow is day 1200 of meditating every single day in a row. And so that's something that really connects me to myself, all of the things, like just finding things to do that didn't involve alcohol. It led me to this Buddhist meditation center. I just felt like the more that I just surrendered and went with the flow and did the things that were in alignment, the more things opened up to me the way that they should have been, even if it wasn't easy. There've been a lot of challenges on the way, but it's like I know I'm where I'm meant to be. So it's a little
So
long-winded.
beautiful. Yeah, I'm hearing just a lot of this like divine timing too, right? And as you continue to follow your own path, getting these signs and finding the right programs and the right mentors in the right timing, right? And so I love that you mentioned that. And something that you mentioned about your sobriety journey that I find really interesting is that you didn't have significant, like maybe what people would think of like a problem with alcohol, but the impact that alcohol was having on you was significant in your life, and you didn't really know that until you fully cut it out. And I think that we can use alcohol as just like a numbing and a distracting tool to kind of not have to sit with the things that are uncomfortable. And I know for myself, cutting out alcohol was huge for my mental health. And similarly, even just like one or two drinks could make a big impact on my mental health too. So yeah, I'm really celebrating you're almost at 2 years of sobriety, no alcohol, and 1200 days of meditation. Like that takes a lot of devotion, and I really just want to celebrate you in that.
Thank you. I appreciate that so much. I do not want to minimize that by saying that there are always things that we kind of have to deal, or I kind of have to deal with in terms of I don't drink alcohol, but there's so many other things we can use to numb, whether it's sugar or marijuana or caffeine or our phones. There's just, and it feels like there can still be this kind of endless list of things. And so at least the tools I built to be sober have helped me to just have awareness of that so I don't numb out.
Yeah, such a good point. How it's not just one substance, but it's like a habit of numbing. Yeah. And we didn't really share too much of your background when we started the conversation, but just giving a little bit of context for your world when it comes to your work life and where you live. Share a little bit with the listeners about who you are and have some more connection there.
Sure. So, just in terms of where I live, I'm currently in Washington, D.C. And I almost feel like it's a political statement to say that, but my job is not related to politics or government in any way. But I love being here, although I've only been here for just over 4 months. So, even that was sort of an act of surrender to get here because I was living in Houston, Texas prior to that. I've lived in other states, but I've lived in Texas the longest, and I just realized it wasn't aligned with me anymore. And I had moved to Scottsdale for a few years, and then the pandemic happened, and I had a job opportunity. So I went back to Houston, but I really just felt like my soul was saying there's somewhere else I was meant to be. So I wrote out a list of all of the characteristics I wanted in a city. And then this job opportunity came up that was in DC, and it just all seemed to line up. And so the job opportunity, I'm in wealth management, and I'm essentially an investment portfolio strategist. I work with financial advisors in putting together portfolios for their ultra high net worth clients. And I've been in the industry since 2009. So even just when I graduated during the global financial crisis and having a lot of student loans and being in a male dominated industry has been quite a challenge and a journey. And there's a lot of spiritual work there too, I would say.
Yeah, totally. And I feel like something that you've really stepped into in our time together is owning like the feminine qualities and expression that you have that you can bring to the table in a more male dominated environment, and like using your voice more and speaking up for yourself. And I know you like to sometimes wear like brighter colors and just really bringing in your feminine power into the space. And it's been, yeah, really cool to watch even some of like the speaking opportunities that you've been getting, and the ways in which you're using your voice in an environment where there's not a lot of women. And like really I feel like that's a value of yours, to create space for women to know like that they also belong in these types of environments.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot to unpack there. There's a lot I could share just thinking about the last 16 years of my career. But that is something that I think about a lot in terms of how far I've come in the industry and where I am, and with some of the things going on right now, just kind of in our cultural climate. I mean, it's I can't take for granted certain things. And so I do feel like I should take the things that I've learned, whether it's about my experience as a woman in the industry or my sobriety or whatever else, and share it with other people that are also dealing with similar things. I do feel like the more authentic I am and the more that I do the inner work, the more successful I am in my career or at my current job, even if I'm not spending as much time on the actual work itself. I mean, of course, there is that component for sure, but just knowing that, trusting that everything's going to come to me. When I started at my last job, I was felt like I had this sort of desperate energy. And now I'm saying, I know it's all going to come to me. I know I'm going to be successful, and I know I'm not going to miss out on anything. And then I wait for those things to come to me, and they do. And it's also, while my job is technical, there's definitely an analytical component. It's also a relationship based business. And I think people can tell if you're being authentic or not to a large extent. So if you're being fake, they can pick up on that. And there's an element of just someone wanting to work with you, wanting to feel like you're showing up and wanting to add value, or it's a mutually beneficial relationship, things like that. So all of that has a lot of applicability, and sometimes people might look at me and I can be very unassuming, but then they kind of see like, okay.
So being a woman in this, male dominated environment, there's also what you've been like, how that has impacted you on when it comes to, let's say, things like burnout, or like the high demand on energy and on you showing up a certain way. And so we've been doing a lot of work behind the scenes to help you to manage that stress and to manage the emotional components of some of the challenges that you experience in the workplace. I'd love for you to share a little bit more about when we first started working together, how you were feeling in your career. You were living in a city that wasn't fully aligned. Give us a little bit more of like where you were when we first started working together.
Sure. I would say there were a lot of good things, but it wasn't where I wanted to be exactly. The last company that I was with would sometimes joke, but it wasn't really a joke, that they were like a bad boyfriend. I tried to make it work and it just didn't seem to really be working, or I was putting so much in and not getting a lot out of it. And so I was just kind of tired of it, even if I wasn't putting as much time or effort into the job that maybe I could have. I would say that, coupled with the fact that I was in a city where I felt like all of my friends were in a different point in their lives with having kids or homes or marriages, and now I felt like I was starting over again in a place that wasn't working, and maybe I had to start over again, and not even knowing what that would look like or where that would be. That's kind of where I was, where it was just like, I'm willing to take the risk again. I've put in a lot of work and I've come so far, but there's still a lot that I need to figure out.
Yeah, you mentioned early this piece of like surrender and trust, and leading up to your move to DC and making these big changes. There was fear that came up, and there was like, it wasn't just like this smooth path of like, I'm deciding to make these changes, like there was a lot that came up for you. So anything that you want to share about the process of, taking the leap or surrendering to let go of control of how fast things are moving, or things that maybe are outside of your control, and how you've learned to navigate that differently through our work together.
Yeah, I will definitely say that it's a journey that can be very bumpy. And even when the job opportunity came up, that took a long time for that to actually materialize. And there were things in terms of my apartment lease. It's not like I had to sell a house, but my apartment lease was up. And that was something where I wanted to signal to the universe that I'm ready for something else. But that also means then I didn't have somewhere to permanently live. So I was just kind of hanging out in Airbnbs for a couple of months. So there were some beautiful things that came out of that in terms of my ability to travel more or meet more people and have people in my life now that I wouldn't have otherwise had. There are also things in terms of the move itself where it's just things that went wrong with losing my phone or delayed flights or whatever else. Like there's just so many kind of unanticipated challenges that can come up. And you just don't even know what you don't know. And that's why I'm willing to do it, because sometimes I can underestimate and be a little naive. But also in that journey, though, when I look back, I think, there wasn't a single point in the last 4 to 6 months where I thought, I regret this. I think I made the wrong decision. It's just, you sort of have to know that you will not miss out on what is meant for you, first of all. Second of all, the more that you surrender, the more beauty that you can find in things and the more sort of synchronicities and miracles. And that's the beauty that I think keeps me going, where it's like, wow, I can't believe that these things happen as a result of me continuing to lean in. And there are times where I'm still facing things I thought I had already dealt with, like imposter syndrome, where it's almost kind of like, oh, are you really this high, doing this well and this high up? And are you just this little girl and people are going to figure out you don't belong here. But I've also learned that through things like, you told me about tapping, and I've incorporated a lot of tapping and journaling and the somatic movements, like even just shaking and making noise and incorporating that with stretching routines, like all of those things help me to process it so much faster. It doesn't last as long and it's just not as deep or dark, let's call it, because there were times I could stay stuck or in low places for months and months. And now the sort of my ability to bounce back is a lot.
Yeah, that rebound period when there are things that feel challenging or out of your control, or when you feel triggered or overwhelmed, instead of it taking going down the spiral and taking months to come back to your center. Not only do you have new tools, but you're actually able to implement them and use them. And especially like being able to do that as someone who has, a full-time job and has lots of responsibility, and finding ways to build that into your day and into your week is huge. So I really want to just celebrate you for the work that you've been doing. Like we've been doing a lot of deeper emotional work and mindset work, and to see the shifts that are happening for you are amazing. So far we've talked about you moved to a new city, you got a new job, and we haven't talked about relationships, because when you were in Texas, you were in a different space when it came to dating and even friendships and things like that. And you're in a whole new space with that area of your life too. So anything that you want to share for our listeners of like where you were before when it came to romantic relationships and where you are now?
I had been single for a really long time, in the sense, like in my 30s, I had dated. I've done a fair amount of dating, but I didn't really have any long relationships. A lot of them were just lessons. I'll just say that. But one of them really was a lesson around my relationship with alcohol, because he drank quite a bit. And then it highlighted to me how quickly I could go back to where I was when I had come so far, and just things like that. I mean, relationships really are a mirror and reflect back to us what we need to work on. And so it felt very painful, honestly, to think about dating. And I needed that time to be single to focus on myself. I really enjoy having freedom to travel and be selfish with my time, and my career is demanding. But I did get on an app when I went to DC. I just, wanted to see kind of what the men were like, how they compared to Houston. You and I have done work together in terms of I can't say that all men are bad. There are good men out there. I have to think about what I want to call in and what is out there because that is going to reflect my reality. And if I don't think that that's possible, then that will be more challenging. I've listened to other people like Bob Proctor or people that talk about manifesting. And I went to Joe Dispenza's retreat. And so I did spend a lot of time kind of meditating on calling in my soulmate or writing out all of the characteristics I wanted in a partner too. So there was a lot of work done around that, even though I had been single for a long time. And so now I do have a boyfriend, and it's still fairly early, but I do think it's like he invited me to go to see his parents for Thanksgiving, and it's going pretty quickly. But when we actually talked about it this weekend in terms of, I wrote out everything that I wanted, and he meets all of that and vice versa. And we both had to show up as these more evolved versions of ourselves and kind of say no to the things that didn't serve us before and kind of have faith that it will be there, which is hard because there were so many times I thought, I don't know, maybe maybe I'm just not meant to find someone, even though that's what I had wanted for so long.
Yeah, I want to come back to a very specific memory that I have from a conversation because I think this is something that shows up for a lot of women who are high achieving and career focused. So there was one point where you had gone on a date and it didn't go well or it just like wasn't inspiring for you. I can't remember exactly what happened. And we were messaging in our private messenger and you were like, "Oh, I think I'm just going to like put dating aside. Like I want to focus on these other areas of my life." And I paused you in that and I was like, "Okay, possibly, but you've been sharing with me how much this is important to you and how much you want a partner. So, like, what do you think is actually standing in the way? Because if this is important for you, then it's an area that we get to focus on." And so I like saw you almost like step away because it felt hard because you're really good at your career and you have a lot of career success, but relationship felt hard for you. And it was like, I can't remember the exact deeper belief that we got to. Do you remember what it was around not being able to find what you really wanted or around dating is hard or that there's no good men out there? There was something there for you. And so we had to do some of the mindset work, like the part of you that wanted to like avoid this area because it felt hard. And so we did some of that deeper mindset work and looked at some of the deeper subconscious beliefs around, what might be actually standing in the way of you meeting a really amazing man. And after that, you ended up going on a bunch of dates and you met a few really great men and you got to explore and experience with different men and then you met the man that you're dating now and it's been really cool to see like have that breakthrough around dating where there was a part of you that wanted to kind of like avoid it for a bit.
Yeah. Okay. So there's so much that I feel like I want to say about this. So at one point, I think that I did have the idea that, there aren't really any good men out there. I had had so many bad experiences. That was something that I held subconsciously and maybe didn't even realize, or maybe just, so there are women that make these characterizations about men. And usually I would completely agree. And that didn't help for this. I think the belief that I had was a little bit like we had worked on that, but then the belief was that, oh, actually, like, I don't think this person's out there. That's my match, or sort of like the doubting that this person, like, okay, yes, there are good men out there, but is there the man out there that's for me? And that was where I started to have doubts. I'm in my late 30s. I've never been married. Now I'm in a new city and all these men they've lived here a long time, or they're not from Houston or whatever. It's just like I didn't even know if I could connect. I had had a lot of traumatic experiences in my life. And even though I've done so much work on myself, would they have the space to even hear about them or, have the emotional depth or, it just almost felt like too much of an ask, I guess. But I did listen to you and you did say that like if this is what I'm trying to call in, why would I give up and quit? And so it makes sense. And this situation you were talking about, this guy, it's funny now, it was not funny at the time, but he definitely displayed this part's not funny about him displaying some red flags and behavior that was inappropriate. But when I told him I didn't want to see him again, he asked me to Venmo him for what he paid for the 2 dates. So that was the part where it's like, okay, that's never happened before. Like never Venmoed someone for my portion of 2 dates. But yeah, you're right. Like even the men that I dated that didn't work out after that, it was still like a much higher quality of men that were more authentic and just more aligned with this version of myself. The guy that is my boyfriend now, it wasn't like I knew immediately. Like sometimes I see on Instagram, like, oh, when you meet your soulmate, you're just going to instantly know, and it wasn't like that because people have had a long history and a lot of experiences before you, and you don't really know who they are with just one conversation or a few conversations. So it did take some time. And even me just saying to him, I still feel like I don't have a good sense of who you are and giving him the space to open up to me or share things with me. And now it's amazing because of how much more comfortable we are with each other, how much we do, how much fun we have together, but how much we care about growing. And then he helps me on my spiritual journey. We meditate together when we spend time together. And he's done tapping before because, like he's stopped drinking too. So he hasn't had a drink in over 50 days at this point. And so it's like my journey now has become positive for him instead of letting men influence me and just getting sucked into their drinking or whatever. Like it's like now I can stand on my own and and he's done his own, he's been on his own journey. So but like I can still be a positive influence for the relationship and vice versa.
Yeah, I love how you described that. And I feel like that is the point in relationship is like we get to do our own work, but being in a conscious growth oriented relationship is you're both going to bring things to the dynamic that enhances each other's lives. And so it really feels like you're both learning so much from each other and supporting each other to create these healthy habits and to create a healthy lifestyle and to continue growing and evolving. And I love this piece around like you being in your center and being your authentic self and even inviting in more depth and more vulnerability because you're willing to speak up and to, ask for what you need and share like I really want to get to know you more. And yeah, I think the way that you've been navigating the beginning of this connection has been really inspiring. And just for all the women who are listening, she went from being single and focused on her career and doing a lot of her own inner work, and there were parts of her that didn't know that it was possible or that doubted it, and here you are, and just showing that continuing on your own path and following your alignment. In your case, it was moving to a new city, finding a new job, stepping into this new identity, putting yourself in a new environment, and being willing to put yourself out there. Like all of those changes are what helped you to attract and manifest the person that you're with today. So, love your journey, all of it. I'd love for you to share, like, because you had done so much work before we were working together, like, what do you feel has been different for you in working with a private mentor and specifically our work together? Like anything that you want to highlight that has been supportive for you?
Yeah, I mean, there's been so many things. One thing that stands out, and this is actually just a much more practical thing, but I struggled with for so long, is when you've helped me create sort of like action plans for things that feel overwhelming when work was busy or I was dealing with sobriety or whatever else. And it's like, oh, doing dishes didn't seem to be that important. And I just hated doing them anyway. And meal prepping and all of those things. It's like, I just didn't really feel like I had a handle on tackling some of those things. And so having you make me accountable for that, like sending you the action items and having a plan for when they will be done and knowing you're going to follow up with me and ask me how they went has really helped quite a bit to where now I just do dishes. It's just not even a thing I think about too much. I just do it, and it's like brushing my teeth or whatever else. And so those things get so much easier when there's somebody to help me kind of break it down and kind of guide me through it, keep me accountable. I think also, I mean, just a lot of the things too in terms of highlighting the areas I still could work on. But even when I say that, it's a lot of it's like you asking me what kind of, it sounds like there's judgment there, or, telling me to be compassionate with myself. And I've been told many, many times that I am too hard on myself. And so you reflecting that to me, that, like, what is the inner, what does my inner child want? Or what would the younger version, the young Jessica, what does she need? And so that, and then the somatic component too, because oftentimes we're so in our head, and that's such a masculine thing, that we have to focus on getting out of our head and getting into our body, and embodying the divine feminine. And so all of that has been very helpful over the last year plus.
Yeah, it's been beautiful to see kind of all those different aspects of the layers of our work together. And I'll even highlight, like, when we first started working together, even though you had done a bunch of meditation, when we would go into somatic practice, it was uncomfortable for you. Like, you would open your eyes, it was like uncomfortable for you. And now, since we've done so much deeper work, like, you're able to be with those sensations and emotions and be more in the present moment with what you're experiencing in your body. Because before, you weren't used to that. It was very distracting and in your head, and, all these different things happening. And so, helping you to drop into your body and really seeing how that has shifted so much for you, even in like your essence and your presence, how you carry yourself, has been really beautiful to see that shift of your ability to be embodied instead of just being in the analytical and the logical mind.
That's beautiful. Yeah, thank you. There's so many beautiful things about my life right now, and there's so many things that I'm grateful for, but moving to a new city is challenging. Moving to, or especially starting a new job that's demanding, is challenging. Even being in a new relationship, as wonderful as it is, it can be triggering at times. And so, having those tools has been so valuable.
Yeah, and I appreciate that you're highlighting that, because sometimes you'll be like, oh, I manifested all these amazing things. And then there's also the humanness of it, of like, these are big changes. This is a big adjustment. It's a big transitions. There's a lot of big things happening all at once, which is what we were talking about, I think, in our last session, of just this huge quantum leap. Like, your whole life looks different. And there was a lot of work on the back end to create that. And there's still some maintenance work that's happening to be able to hold that, to receive it, to sustain it, because it can feel overwhelming to have all these big changes. And so, how can I actually like hold those manifestations and receive those manifestations and rise into them instead of collapsing, which has been quite a bit of the work that we've been doing recently, is like really being able to expand into this new version of yourself that you're becoming.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Because there's so many times people think like, I want more money, and then they get it, but their nervous system isn't equipped to be able to handle it. And sometimes I have felt that, and I still can feel that at times, where you think, oh, I want this big promotion, or I want this big thing. And then you got it. And you just, I don't, you're just not equipped maybe like you think you would be. And you think it's just going to be so amazing. Being able to stay present. I talked about my ability to kind of get out of those ruts. And so it's almost like the opposite, but it's very similar in terms of getting back into the present moment and being able to ground myself, because there are a lot of things that can make me feel uncertainty or worry. But when I can get back into the present and I can surrender, that's where, I mean, it's just it's the same exact external world. But when I can internally recalibrate, then things look so different.
Yeah, so powerful. And you're using the tools to help you to get grounded. And I'll just share with people who are listening, like, doesn't have to be super complicated. And especially when you have so much going on in your life, like relationship and work and taking care of yourself and all these things, coaching is not meant to be this additional thing that adds more pressure or more things to check off your to-do list. It's really designed to help you to embody and to integrate these tools into your everyday life where it just becomes part of who you are. So I've really seen you do that, and yeah, continue to find ways to, instead of it having to be this long checklist of things, but it's like, okay, I know you have your toolkit, you have the resources available to you, and then it's like picking the one that you know is going to best serve you at that time.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So there's one other piece that I want to talk about before we wrap up today. So when we first got on a call to talk about coaching, I can't remember if you had worked with a coach before, but there was like a little bit of the hesitation of like, oh, this is a big investment. This is like a big decision to make. And so for someone who's maybe like on the fence, they're like, oh, I know that having Amy as my mentor would be really supportive. And there may be some fear of like, time or money, what might you share with someone who's in that place?
Sure. I completely understand both of those levels, especially the money part, even though I make so much more money now. It just feels like everything is so much more expensive. And so that's a real practical concern. But I also think about the value that comes with the skills we've talked about. Because one thing I didn't mention was just when I was approached about the job opportunity, the amount that I asked for. And it wasn't about saying, oh, these are my skills and experience and how long I've been doing it. It was more about having the confidence and the self-worth to believe that I was worthy of asking for it and standing in that. Knowing that if they were like, oh, who do you think you are? That I could be like, okay, it wasn't meant to be. And so I think that having the
Let's pause because you got what you asked for. Like you
yeah,
set
yeah.
you set the bar of like where you wanted it to be, and you pitched what you felt you wanted, and you got offered this incredible opportunity, and you received what you asked for.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think it goes back to the point around the abundance mindset and knowing that if you spend the money and you're putting work and the time and the money into something that's beneficial for you, you're going to get a lot more out of it than you have to put into it. And so we've had money sessions before, and I even, I can teach, or I've taught like financial literacy for women. And I have recently, the most recent one I did, I incorporated the energetics around money. And it's the same thing like with men. And so if you hold on to money too tightly and you think that it's a scarce resource, that's what you're going to see reflected back to you. And so if you think that I'm an abundant person, I have everything I need, this is something that's going to be beneficial for me, then that will come back to you in different ways too. Like what you said, I got what I asked for. And when you look at the evolution of what I keep believing that I'm worthy of, and just the notion that we are limitless beings and we're the only ones that impose limitations on ourselves, then it's a no brainer. But I mean, I know there are more practical considerations to it. But of course, there's just so much value that comes out of it, both tangible and intangible.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, there's the abundance mindset, the focus on the growth and the expansion rather than on the contraction or the scarcity. And like you said, sometimes it does come down to a financial resource thing. And a lot of the time there's the energetics behind it of like, okay, investing myself in this way is actually about investing in becoming the most abundant version of myself, the stepping into my highest potential for relationships, for my career. And so really saying yes to your future self is what it is. Right. So I just really want to honor you for your courage to say yes and to continue to do the deeper work. And been such a joy and pleasure to support you so far. And I'm excited to see what else you manifest and create in your life and who you become as we continue to work together. So thank you for sharing your story and your journey. And, for anyone who's listening who maybe is considering a sobriety journey or who maybe would like some support with resources of where they could look for that, or if they resonated with anything that you shared today, where is the best place for people to find you and connect with you?
So they could find me on LinkedIn. That might not be the coolest way. I'm also on Instagram. I don't post very much. I'm not super active, but it's just the Jessica Heckel, and someone could DM me. There's so many resources. Like there's a community called Reframe that I used to help me stop drinking. And they even have something called a speaker share. So I've actually done 2 speaker shares now. And so it's just so beautiful to be able to connect with people and that are also doing the work. And now all of a sudden it's like most of the people in my life are sober versus like all I saw were people that drank. So anyway, but those are 2 ways people can get in touch with me.
Beautiful. We'll drop your Instagram handle in the show notes. People can reach out to you. And then also, yeah, the resource for Reframe for sobriety. And yeah, thanks for sharing your wisdom today. Thanks for sharing your story. And I'm super grateful for you.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great, and I'm very grateful for you too.